My name is Clara Bennett, and I am 28 years old. On the day of my grandfather Walter's funeral, the sky over Ashwood pressed down with the weight of lead-thick clouds swallowing what little light the morning had to offer. The cemetery smelled of wet soil and wilted lilies, the kind of heavy scent that clings to your clothes and makes your chest ache. A cold wind carried the faint creak of the oaks lining the path, a sound too much like the groan of an old door shutting forever. I stood beside the casket that had been sealed shut before I ever laid eyes on him, my hands clammy inside my gloves, my heart fighting against my ribs as though trying to escape. They told me his body was too mangled from a car crash, that it was better this way, that seeing him would be unbearable. Yet the explanation rang hollow, and the more I stared at the polished wood box, the more it seemed like a stage prop, not a resting place. My father, Richard, stood a few feet away, his face carved from stone, his arm heavy around my mother Evelyn's shoulders. She leaned against him like a dutiful shadow. Her eyes dry, her lips pursed her posture, saying obedience more than grief. My brother David loomed tall near the head of the casket, broad-shouldered, restless, his eyes flicking to the pastor, and then to his wife Monica, who leaned close and smirked at some whispered comment. It felt obscene laughter rippling under the black veil she wore, as if this were not a burial but a rehearsal dinner for some cruel play. Their clothes were immaculate, their shoes polished to mirrors, but not one of them shed a tear. The silence around them was not mourning, but calculation, like wolves waiting for a signal. I gripped the cold iron rail of the family plot, fighting the unease crawling along my skin. I had always known my family could be cruel, but cruelty at a graveside was something different. That was when my phone buzzed inside my pocket, the vibration sharp and wrong in that suffocating quiet. I glanced around quickly before slipping it out, shielding the screen against my palm. A text message glowed against the gloom. I am still alive. Trust no one. Leave now. My breath caught and the world tilted sideways. The letters swam as if my mind refused to believe them. Alive. My grandfather was alive. My knees softened and I pressed my free hand to a headstone beside me to keep from crumpling. A thin drizzle began to fall, darkening the shoulders of my coat. But I hardly felt it. I typed back with shaking fingers. Who are you? The reply came before I had time to breathe. I cannot say. They are watching. Trust no one in your family. My throat locked and the metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. Slowly, I lifted my eyes, scanning the faces of those who stood only yards from me. Richard's jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the pastor with a false air of devotion. Evelyn dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief that remained dry. Her movements, mechanical, rehearsed. David's head bowed, but his eyes flicked toward Monica, who scrolled on her phone beneath her veil, her lips tugged by a secret smile. For a fleeting second, David met Richard's eyes, a small nod, passing between them so swift and subtle, I might have doubted it if my phone had not just warned me. The memory of my grandfather's voice rose unbidden. Clara, the truth is always in the eyes. Now looking at them, I saw no sorrow, only ice and intent. The pastor droned on about eternal rest, his words floating hollow in the damp air, but I could not hear him anymore. My pulse roared in my ears, and my chest burned with the urge to scream. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it. If you stay, you will not leave alive. Walk away. Now. The words slammed through me harder than any blow. The drizzle turned to rain, pattering on umbrellas, opening all around, but none shielded me. The family I had known since birth stood like statues carved to fool the world, but I suddenly saw the cracks in the stone. Richard's eyes darting too often, Evelyn's fingers clutching her husband's sleeve as though begging silent reassurance, David's hand squeezing Monica's waist too firmly, her smirk stiffening for a fraction before returning. None of this was grief. It was theater, and I was the only audience who had not been given a script. The pastor invited us to scatter earth upon the coffin. The sound of damp soil striking the wood echoed like gunshots, each thud final and cruel. My heart lurched with every strike. What lay inside that box, if my grandfather was still alive somewhere. And if he warned me not to trust my family, then the people standing shoulder to shoulder with me were not mourners. They were predators circling a prey they thought too weak to fight. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my phone into the mud. I slipped it into my purse quickly, afraid one of them might glimpse the screen. David turned suddenly and laid a hand on my shoulder, his grip heavy fingers pressing a beat too long. His smile was wrong, stretched thin, and the weight of his hand felt like ownership. I forced myself not to flinch, not to reveal the storm inside me. Quiet strength, my grandfather used to tell me. Wait for the moment, then strike. The earth covered the casket inch by inch, and yet all I could see was a trap closing around me. If I stayed, I knew I would be buried long before Walter ever was. When people ask me about my childhood, I often pause because the truth is not the kind of story you share over coffee or laughter. I grew up in the Bennett household where silence was louder than screams, and love was measured not in kindness, but in control. My father, Richard, was a towering man, broad shoulders and a booming voice that could shake the walls. He believed discipline was love, or at least that was the excuse he repeated every time his belt struck the back of my legs, or his hand clamped around my wrist until the bones ached. You need to learn respect, Clara, he would growl. This is for your own good. And when I cried, when I tried to explain that I had only dropped a plate or spoken out of turn, he would sneer and tell me I was imagining things. That kind of denial, that twisting of reality, is something people now call gaslighting. But back then, it was just life inside our house. My mother, Evelyn, played the part of the perfect wife, nodding along, never challenging him. She never raised her hand, but her silence was just as sharp as any slap. Whenever I begged her to intervene, she would sigh and whisper, "Your father only wants what is best for you, Clara. You are too sensitive." Her words dug deeper than any bruise. They told me that my pain was invisible, that my truth was not real, that survival meant obedience. Then there was David, my older brother by 4 years. If Richard was the architect of cruelty, then David was the eager apprentice. He mimicked our father's every move. By the time he was 12, he had already learned how to twist my arm behind my back until I cried out laughing when I begged him to stop. He would lock me out in the cold yard for hours, and when I shivered too violently to stand, he would tell me I was weak, that real Bennetts endured. Once, when I was 15 and dared to shove him away during an argument, he pinned me to the wall, his hand around my throat, squeezing just enough to make my vision darken. He released me with a smile, whispering, "You should know your place, little sister." He was the golden child praised for his strength, his charm, his supposed leadership. Our parents never punished him, not once, no matter what he did. If I protested, Evelyn would call me jealous, and Richard would strike me for lying about my brother. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned the one lesson they wanted me to absorb: silence was safer than truth. But not everyone in my world believed that. My grandfather, Walter, lived on the edge of town, in a modest farmhouse with chipped paint and squeaky floors, a place that always smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. He was my father's father, yet he was everything Richard was not. Where Richard ruled with intimidation, Walter guided with patience. Where David mocked my tears, Walter dried them with his rough hands scarred from decades of farm work. He was a veteran, a man who had seen battlefields in foreign countries, but he never raised his voice at me. Instead, he told stories of endurance, of survival, of waiting for the right moment to stand tall. "Quiet strength, Clara," he said once, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the fields. A soldier who wastes bullets too soon is a dead man. A woman who waits and watches can change her life with one well-timed step. He gave me something my parents never did: belief that I was worth protecting. Many evenings after my father's rages, I would sneak out and walk to the farmhouse, slipping into Walter's kitchen where he would already have a cup of tea waiting. He never asked for details, never forced me to recount what I had endured. He would simply sit beside me until my shaking eased. Those moments carved a space of safety inside me, that no amount of violence could erase. It was because of him that I found the courage to leave home at 18. I packed a duffel bag, walked away from the Bennett house, and never looked back. I worked nights, studied nursing, and eventually found a small apartment in a nearby town where no one raised their voice at me. Still, I visited Walter whenever I could. He had become frailer with age, but his eyes remained sharp, and he never stopped warning me to be careful. "Your father is not done. Clara," he would mutter, "David has his hunger too. They see people only as possessions. Promise me you will never let them own you again." I promised and I meant it, but promises do not stop monsters from circling. In the years that followed, I watched from the sidelines as Richard and David began circling Walter's property. They pressured him to sell the farmland to sign over rights to increase his insurance. They brought real estate agents to his porch without asking. When he refused, they grew colder visits, turning into arguments into weeks of silence. Evelyn pretended to mediate, but always sided with her husband and son. Monica entered the picture 5 years ago, David's chosen partner. From the moment she first shook my hand, her smile felt like a blade. She was polished, ambitious, dripping with disdain for anyone who failed to admire her. She laughed at the chipped paint of Walter's farmhouse, wrinkled her nose at the smell of manure, whispered loud enough for me to hear that people like us were dragging David down. I knew then she was not just a bystander. She was a sharpened edge in their arsenal. Through all of this, Walter remained stubborn. "This land is my life," he told me. "Your grandmother and I built it from nothing. I will not sign it away." Yet I noticed his hands tremble more when he poured his coffee, his steps slower across the porch. He was aging, and they knew it. Predators wait for weakness. My last conversation with him still echoes in my head. We sat on the porch one autumn evening, the air crisp with fallen leaves. He looked at me with those sharp eyes and said, "Clara, if anything happens, anything at all, look into their eyes. You will see the truth." Then he pressed a small envelope into my hands, telling me not to open it unless the world fell apart. I still have it. And now, as I stood at his funeral with the text message burning in my pocket, those words clawed at me like a prophecy. He had known. He had always known. After Walter's warning, I began to notice the cracks spreading wider than ever across our family. They were not sudden, not explosions of rage like Richard's fists had been in my childhood, but slow, deliberate moves like chess pieces sliding across a board. Richard had grown older, but not softer. His hair thinned, his face sagged, but his voice still carried the authority of a man who demanded obedience. He spoke of legacy now, of family honor, of making sure the Bennetts were seen as people of stature in Ashwood. But his vision of legacy was nothing more than control wrapped in silk words. Evelyn followed him faithfully, repeating his phrases like scripture. Sometimes she would call me on the phone, her voice sweet like sugar gone sour, telling me that I should come to dinner more often, that family is all we have, Clara, that Walter was being unreasonable by clinging to that farm. She always added little barbs. "David is doing so well," she would say, "building a future, working on investments. Why can't you be more supportive like Monica?" It was never a question. It was a comparison meant to slice me down. David himself had transformed from the cruel boy who once pinned me against the wall into a man with sharp suits and a colder heart. He worked with Richard on business schemes that none of them ever explained clearly, deals whispered about in hushed voices over brandy. Whenever I walked into a room, they stopped talking, and Monica would offer me that sly smile, like a woman savoring a secret. Monica's presence poisoned the air. She had a way of looking around Walter's house with thinly veiled disgust, dragging her manicured finger along dusty windowsills as if cataloging his failures. Once during a Thanksgiving dinner at the farmhouse, she wrinkled her nose at the chipped dishes and said, half joking but fully cruel, "Maybe it's time we move Granddad somewhere modern. Somewhere with better, facilities." David laughed. Evelyn nodded. Richard cleared his throat in agreement. Walter's jaw clenched, his fork clattering against the plate. I saw the flash of pain in his eyes and felt my chest tighten with rage, but I bit my tongue. Quiet strength. Wait. Watch. Their pressure mounted over the years. Real estate agents began visiting the farmhouse uninvited. I caught David once showing one of them the barn, as if he already owned the land. Walter confronted him, his voice low but steady, telling him to leave and never bring strangers onto his property again. David smirked and said, "Come on, old man, the land's wasted on you. We could build something big here, make millions." Richard stood behind him, silent approving. That silence was worse than words. The financial manipulation soon followed. Walter's insurance policy, once modest, suddenly ballooned to 5 times its value. I only learned this because Walter himself mentioned it one evening, shaking his head. "Your father insists," he said. "He says it's for protection for you if anything happens to me." But, Clara, I never trusted men who push too hard for safety nets. Safety nets often look like nooses. I urged him to change it back to remove Richard and David as beneficiaries, but Walter only sighed. "They will smell it," he said. "And if they smell it, they will come faster." His voice carried the weight of someone who had fought too many battles to underestimate an enemy. My stomach churned with unease, but what power did I have against a father, a mother, a brother, and his venomous wife? All I could do was observe, collect pieces of the puzzle, and hope I was wrong. I wasn't. The visits grew less like family gatherings and more like interrogations. Richard would sit at Walter's kitchen table laying out papers with highlighted numbers telling him how much he could gain if he sold now, how much he could leave for his children. David would hover in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at me like I was an intruder. Evelyn would pour coffee, smiling too sweetly, telling Walter that he was old, that it was time to think of comfort, that the farmhouse was too much work. Monica would add in her honeyed voice, "A retirement community would suit you. You'd have nurses, friends, activities. Think of how lonely it is here." Every word was coated in poison. Walter would shake his head, his voice calm but firm. "This land is mine. I raised my children here. I will die here." His refusal only hardened their resolve. I began to notice strange inconsistencies, too. Bank statements on Walter's counter that showed withdrawals he claimed never to have made. Signatures on documents that looked shaky, not like his steady handwriting. Once when I asked him about them, he looked at me with sorrow and admitted David had been helping him with paperwork. "I don't need help, Clara," he said. "But sometimes they push the papers under my nose and I sign just to end the conversation." He rubbed his temples, tired. "I wish I had your strength." My anger burned, but I said nothing. To challenge them outright would have put Walter in greater danger. I needed patience. The tension finally cracked into something uglier one summer evening when I visited unexpectedly. From the porch, I heard raised voices inside the farmhouse. Richard's booming anger, David's harsh accusations, Evelyn's pleading tones, Monica's cold interjections. I froze by the door, listening. "Sign the damn papers," Richard thundered. "You don't need this place anymore." David added, "If you really cared about family, you'd stop being stubborn." Monica chimed in with her silky disdain. "Do you want to be remembered as the selfish old man who left nothing?" Then silence broken only by Walter's steady voice. "I will not sign. Get out." A crash followed, a table overturned, and then hurried footsteps. I darted around the corner as the 4 of them stormed out, faces twisted with fury. David spotted me, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" he barked. I forced a casual smile, my heart pounding. Just visiting Granddad. But his glare told me he knew I had heard enough. When they drove away, I slipped inside. Walter sat slumped in his chair, his hand bleeding from a cut where glass had shattered. He looked at me with weary eyes. "Clara," he whispered, "if something happens to me, remember what I told you. Look into their eyes." I bandaged his hand, my own shaking. I wanted to scream to call the police to expose them right then, but his warning held me back. If I moved too soon, I might only hasten whatever storm they were preparing. That night, as I left the farmhouse, the weight of dread settled on me like a cloak. They were circling him, and I knew deep in my bones that they would not stop until they got what they wanted. The news came on a Tuesday morning when the summer sun had barely crept through my blinds. My phone rang with a number I recognized as Evelyn's. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Her voice was flat, drained of all pretense. "Clara, it's your grandfather. He's gone." My stomach lurched. "Gone? What do you mean?" She sighed like she was delivering news of a broken appliance, rather than the death of the only man who had ever truly loved me. Car accident, she said. The word struck like a hammer. The police found him on the highway. They say it was quick. Then the line went dead before I could ask questions. No details, no location, no explanation, just finality. I sat frozen, staring at the phone in my hand, knowing with every fiber of my body that something was wrong. Walter was careful, meticulous. He drove only familiar routes, never at night, always checked his truck twice before leaving. An accident didn't fit. The call from Evelyn was followed within hours by another, this time from Richard. His tone was brisk, efficient. "We'll handle the arrangements. Funeral Monday, closed casket. Don't worry about a thing." I tried to ask about the police report, about where the accident had occurred, about whether I could see Walter's body, but Richard cut me off with a growl. "The matter is settled. Focus on paying your respects." Then he hung up. My hands trembled as I stared at the silent phone. Settled. That was the word he had used, as if death were a financial dispute, as if my grief could be wrapped in paperwork and filed away. I drove to the farmhouse that evening, only to find it eerily quiet, the porch light dark, the windows shuttered. A heavy padlock hung from the front door, new and gleaming. I banged on the door until my fists throbbed, but no one answered. Neighbors told me Richard and David had been there earlier that day, hauling boxes into their truck. They left before nightfall, saying Walter wouldn't need the place anymore. My throat burned with rage. He had not even been buried, and they were already stripping his home like vultures picking at a carcass. At the funeral, the casket was closed tight, polished so perfectly, the gray clouds reflected in its surface. No one offered me a chance to see him, to confirm with my own eyes that Walter lay inside. The explanation was repeated like a script. The body was too damaged. It was better for everyone this way. Let us focus on the memory, not the remains. But the script had cracks. When I pressed Evelyn, she shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. When I asked David directly, his eyes slid away from mine, and he muttered that it was best not to dwell. Monica Ever, the actress, simply smiled and told me I was too emotional, that grief made people unreasonable. My suspicion only deepened when I saw the death certificate. It was pushed into my hands at the cemetery, already signed, already sealed. Cause of death, blunt force trauma from automobile collision. I skimmed it quickly, noticing the signature of a doctor I had never heard of. I asked where the body had been taken, which hospital had handled it, but Richard's glare silenced me. "This is not the time for questions," he hissed. "Respect your family!" Yet everything in my gut screamed that the time for questions was long overdue. The casket descended into the ground, the thud of dirt hitting the lid making me flinch with each strike. That was when the first message arrived, glowing on my screen like a ghost's handprint. "I am still alive. Trust no one. Leave now." My blood turned to ice, my grandfather's words echoing from beyond the grave, or perhaps not from beyond at all. My pulse hammered, my vision blurred, and the world narrowed until all I could see was the phone in my hand. I managed to reply, desperate, terrified. "Who are you?" The answer came fast, as if the sender had been waiting. "I cannot say. They are watching. Trust no one in your family." I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my expression neutral, as I scanned the faces around me. Richard stood tall and stiff, watching the pastor, but his eyes darted sideways to David. Evelyn pressed a tissue to her face, though her eyes remained dry. Monica tapped something on her phone under the veil, her lips twitching into a private smile. They looked wrong. They looked staged. They looked like people who were hiding a secret too large to contain. Then came the second message, the one that clawed the last of my sanity. "If you stay, you will not leave alive. Walk away, now." My knees wavered, my stomach churned, and I realized with horror that I was not simply at my grandfather's funeral. I was standing in the middle of a trap, surrounded by people who might have orchestrated not only his death, but perhaps my own. I forced myself to lower the phone, to slip it into my purse as if nothing had happened. David turned at that moment and laid a hand on my shoulder, heavy, too heavy. His grip lingered, his thumb pressing into my collarbone. His smile was stretched thin, a performance, and his eyes bored into mine with a glint that said he knew more than he ever should. My heart screamed to run, to shout, to tear open the casket and demand the truth, but my grandfather's voice whispered through my memory, Quiet strength, Clara. Wait for the moment, then strike. I nodded, pretending to be calm, even as the rain began to fall and the casket disappeared into the ground. Whether Walter lay inside or not, I knew one thing for certain. The real danger was standing above the grave dressed in black, sharing my blood. In the days after the funeral, I carried the secret of those messages like a hot coal pressed against my chest. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped terrified that someone might notice, terrified that Richard or David would glance over my shoulder and see words they were never meant to read. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, nodded, when Evelyn delivered her sweetly poisonous condolences, and accepted Monica's cold pats on my arm as if they were gestures of comfort. Inside, I was a storm, but I remembered Walter's words, wait, watch, and strike only when the time was right. The first step was simple, but dangerous. I returned to the farmhouse late one evening, parking down the road and walking through the tall grass to avoid being seen. The padlock still gleamed on the door, but a kitchen window had always stuck slightly open, and with enough force, I pried it up and slipped inside. The house smelled wrong. It no longer carried the scent of coffee and wood smoke, but of dust and disinfectant, as if someone had scrubbed it too clean. Boxes were stacked in the hallway, papers scattered across the table. I pulled on gloves I had brought and began searching. In the desk drawer of Walter's study, I found insurance documents, some dating back decades, but the most recent was different. The ink was darker, the handwriting shaky, the signature looking more like a forged imitation than Walter's steady script. A new policy had been added just 3 months ago, increasing the payout fivefold and naming Richard and David as primary beneficiaries. I held the paper under the weak desk lamp, my stomach twisting. Walter had warned me. He knew they were circling him like vultures. In another drawer, I found bank withdrawal slips, each signed with Walter's name, but again unsteady, almost trembling. Thousands had been taken in the months leading up to his supposed accident. I knew Walter. He counted every dollar, carefully, hated unnecessary spending. These withdrawals were not his. They were staged, orchestrated, stolen. A creak outside made me freeze. Headlights flashed briefly through the window. My breath caught. I darted into the pantry and crouched, heart pounding, as footsteps approached the porch. Keys rattled, the padlock snapped open. And I heard voices. David's low murmur and Monica's sharp laugh. They entered the kitchen, their movements casual but purposeful. I pressed a hand over my mouth as they rifled through the boxes. Monica spoke first. She really bought it, didn't she? She thinks the old man's in the ground. David chuckled. She'll never see him again. By the time she asks questions, it'll be too late. My blood iced. The old man, Walter. Alive somewhere. Monica continued, her tone mocking. Did you see her face at the funeral, like a lost puppy? She's too soft, too stupid. We'll have her out of the way soon enough. David grunted. Dad's already working on it. Papers, evaluations, the whole 9 yards. We'll have her declared unfit before winter. My lungs burned. They weren't just planning to erase Walter. They were planning to erase me too, to have me locked away or worse. I waited until their footsteps receded, until the door clicked shut and the lock snapped again. Only then did I slip out the pantry window and run into the night, my hands shaking but my mind sharpened with rage. The next morning, another message appeared. Check Walter's safe. Look behind the false wall. My pulse quickened. Someone was guiding me, someone who knew too much to be a prankster. That night, I returned to the farmhouse with a flashlight. Behind the shelf in the study, I found the panel Walter had once shown me. Inside the safe was an envelope addressed to me in Walter's handwriting. Clara, if you are reading this, I may already be gone. They are pushing me, forcing me into policies and papers I do not trust. I believe Richard and David mean to harm me. If anything happens, do not believe their words. Gather proof. Protect yourself. Trust no one. My eyes blurred with tears. He had known. He had left me the truth. Inside the envelope were photocopies of documents showing the changes to his insurance and bank accounts. He had circled signatures, scribbled notes in the margins. They are preparing something. Stay sharp. My phone buzzed again. Meet me. Corner Diner, tomorrow at noon. My hands shook as I typed back. Who are you? The reply was swift. A friend of Walter's. Trust me. I debated all night, fear and hope battling inside me. Finally, I went sitting at the far booth of the nearly empty diner. At noon, a man slid into the seat across from me. He was in his 40s, weathered face, sharp eyes, a quiet confidence about him. Ethan Cole. He introduced himself softly. Private investigator. Your grandfather hired me 3 weeks before his disappearance. My chest tightened. Disappearance, not death. Ethan opened a folder, sliding it across. Inside were photographs of Richard and David at a hardware store purchasing cans of accelerant and tools that could stage a crash. Receipts paid in cash. Surveillance stills of Monica meeting a banker under a false name. Ethan leaned closer. Your grandfather suspected they would try to stage an accident. He asked me to gather evidence quietly. He wanted to protect you. My throat burned. Protect me from my own family. Ethan nodded. And he was right. They are dangerous. They have debts, Clara. Gambling loans, the kind of debts that draw blood if unpaid. Killing Walter wasn't just about greed. It was desperation. He paused, studying me. And now they are circling you. You are the last obstacle. I pressed my fists against the table, fury trembling in every muscle. What do we do? Ethan's eyes hardened. We wait. We gather. We strike when they least expect it. Quiet strength. My grandfather's words again echoing like prophecy. And for the first time since that text at the funeral, I felt not just fear but fire. The first sign came on a Sunday afternoon when Evelyn called and insisted I come to dinner. Her voice was sweet as syrup, too sweet, the kind of tone she only used when she had rehearsed her lines. Against every instinct, I agreed, because Ethan had warned me to stay close enough to see their moves. The moment I stepped inside the family house, the air thickened. Richard sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on me as though weighing my worth. David lounged beside him, Monica at his side, both too relaxed, too confident. Evelyn flitted around with dishes, her smile brittle. Sit, Clara, Richard commanded, his tone making it clear it was not a request. I sat, my palms damp, every nerve screaming caution. They began eating in silence until Evelyn finally spoke. We've been worried about you. You've been acting strange since the funeral. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Strange, David smirked. Running around town asking questions, sneaking into places you shouldn't be. People are talking, Clara. You sound paranoid. Monica leaned forward, her eyes glittering. Grief can do that to the weak-minded. It makes them see things that aren't there. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice calm. I'm not weak-minded. I just want to know what happened to Granddad. Richard's hand slammed the table, making the dishes jump. Enough. He died in a car accident. End of story. Stop embarrassing this family with your fantasies. My pulse thundered, but I forced my expression neutral. Ethan's words echoed in my head. Don't let them see your fear. David's grin widened as he leaned closer. Mom and Dad spoke to a doctor. He says it's common for women your age to develop paranoia after loss. Maybe you should consider treatment. My stomach dropped. This was their game, to paint me unstable, to discredit me before I could ever speak. Evelyn nodded sympathetically. Clara, dear, there are lovely facilities, places where you could rest, he'll be cared for. Her eyes glinted with something darker. I realized with chilling clarity that they wanted me locked away just like Ethan had warned. Monica slid a pastry plate toward me, her voice silky. Eat, Clara! You look thin. Too thin. I stared at the pastry, the flaky crust golden, but my phone buzzed silently in my pocket with a pre-written warning from Ethan. Don't eat or drink what they offer. I forced a smile. I already ate. David's eyes narrowed. You don't trust us. My voice stayed steady. I just don't have an appetite. Silence stretched heavy, suffocating. Then Richard spoke, his tone cold steel. If you can't behave, we'll make decisions for you. You are not the only Bennett who matters. His words were not a threat. They were a verdict. I excused myself as soon as I could, claiming exhaustion, and left with their stares burning holes in my back. That night, Ethan and I met at the diner. He listened carefully as I repeated every word. He nodded grimly. They're setting up a case. False medical reports witness statements about your behavior. If they succeed, you'll be declared unfit. Then they'll control everything. I clenched my fists. We can't let that happen. Ethan slid a recorder across the table. Wear this. Document everything. They'll hang themselves with their own words. 2 nights later, David showed up at my apartment uninvited. He leaned in the doorway casual, but his presence filled the small space like a storm cloud. He scanned the room as if measuring it, then fixed his gaze on me. "You've been busy, haven't you, little sister?" His voice dripped with contempt, asking questions poking around where you shouldn't. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face blank. "I'm grieving. That's all." He stepped closer, his hand brushing the wall fingers, tapping slowly, deliberately. "Careful, Clara. Curiosity is dangerous. People who dig too deep end up buried." He smirked at his own pun, then leaned so close I could feel his breath. "Dad thinks you're a problem. Problems get solved." My stomach twisted, but I remembered Ethan's device clipped under my sweater. Every word David said was being recorded. I forced a shaky smile. "Maybe you should leave." David's eyes narrowed, but he finally straightened, muttered something under his breath, and left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. My legs gave out and I collapsed onto the couch, shaking, but also burning with grim satisfaction. I had his threat. Proof. The next morning, another message arrived from the unknown number. "They'll try again soon. Stay strong." My hands shook as I read it. Whoever was sending these messages was still watching, still guiding me. Later that week, Richard confronted me outside my workplace. He stood by his car, his shadow long in the late afternoon sun. "Clara," he said, his voice calm, almost kind. "Stop fighting us. It's for your own good." He gestured to the car. "Come home. Let's talk like a family." The calm tone chilled me more than his rage ever had. I shook my head. "I have work." His eyes hardened, the mask slipping. "Do not defy me." I felt the old fear rise, the fear of a child cornered by a giant, but I also felt something new, defiance carved sharp by years of pain. I met his stare and said quietly, "I'm not your possession." His jaw clenched, his hands flexing as though he wanted to strike me, but people passed on the sidewalk and he forced himself back into the car, his tires squealing as he drove away. I exhaled shakily. For the first time in years, I had spoken back to him without flinching, and I realized then that the war had truly begun. Thanksgiving came gray and bitter, the kind of day when families gather to pretend unity over turkey and pie. Richard insisted I attend his voice on the phone, clipped and sharp. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Ethan urged me to go. "This is your moment," he said. "We have enough evidence now. We just need them to expose themselves." I wore Walter's locket around my neck, his photograph pressed against my heart, a silent shield. When I arrived at the family house, the table was already set, every place polished, every plate gleaming. Richard sat at the head, Evelyn to his right, David and Monica across from each other like smug royalty. Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too bright. "Sit," Clara Richard commanded. "We have much to discuss." I sat, my recorder hidden in my purse, my hand steady though my pulse pounded like war drums. The meal began in silence, the clink of cutlery filling the room. Finally, David leaned back, his voice dripping arrogance. "Clara, we've been patient, but you're making this harder than it needs to be." Monica added smoothly, "You're tired. Everyone sees it. It's time you let people who care for you make decisions." Evelyn chimed in with a rehearsed sigh. "We've spoken to a judge. Papers are ready. It's only a matter of time." My blood chilled. They weren't bluffing. They were ready to strip me of everything, my freedom, my voice, my life. Richard leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Sign the documents, Clara. Admit you need help. Move into care. It will be easier for everyone." My stomach twisted, but I forced calm into my voice. "And if I don't?" David's grin sharpened. "Then we'll make sure you have no choice." His words hung heavy in the air. Monica's hand brushed his arm, her smile wicked. "It's for the best," she whispered. That was the moment I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on the table. Insurance papers, bank statements, withdrawal slips, photographs Ethan had gathered. I slid them across the polished wood, my hands steady. For a heartbeat, they stared confused. Then Richard snatched the papers and scanned them. His face paled, his jaw tightening. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David's smirk faltered. Monica's nails tapped rapidly against her wine glass. I spoke clearly, each word cutting the air. Forged signatures, illegal withdrawals, life insurance you forced Walter to increase, evidence of staged accidents, and recordings, your threats, your lies. The room froze. Richard's knuckles whitened as he gripped the papers. "Where did you get this?" he snarled. Ethan stepped from the doorway, tall and steady, recorder in hand. "From your own mouths," he said. "I called the police. They're on their way." David surged to his feet, rage twisting his face. "You little bitch!" he roared, lunging across the table. His hand clamped around my arm, fingers bruising, but Ethan intercepted, shoving him back. Richard rose, his face purple with fury. But before he could act, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights splashed across the curtains. The room dissolved into chaos. Evelyn sobbed. Richard cursed. David pounded the wall. Monica screamed that it was a mistake. Officers stormed inside, their voices firm, commanding. "Richard Bennett, David Bennett, Monica Bennett, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." Richard tried to bluster, shouting about family rights, about misunderstandings. But the officers shoved him against the wall and cuffed him. David fought, thrashing like a cornered animal, until 3 men dragged him down. Monica wailed, her mask of control shattering. Evelyn collapsed in her chair, whispering Richard's name as though it would save her. I sat frozen, my body trembling, but my mind blazing with clarity. It was over. For once in my life, the predators had been trapped. Not me. One officer knelt beside me. "Are you all right, miss?" I nodded slowly, clutching Walter's locket. "Yes. For the first time in a long time, I am." Richard's glare seared into me as he was dragged past, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this, Clara. You're no daughter of mine." I met his stare and whispered, "You're right. I'm not." David spat at the floor, his eyes wild, but when the recordings were played back to him in the squad car, his face collapsed into defeat. Monica shrieked about lawyers, about how she would ruin me, but the handcuffs silenced her arrogance. Evelyn clung to the table sobbing, but I felt no pity. She had watched all her life, and watching is its own crime. As the police cars pulled away, the night fell strangely quiet. Ethan stood beside me, his hand light on my shoulder. "It's done," he said. "You did it." My knees buckled, but I caught myself standing tall. "No," I corrected. "Walter did it. He taught me to wait, to watch, to strike. Now justice will finish the rest." The trial began 3 months later in the county courthouse, a gray stone building that loomed over the square like a fortress. Reporters crowded the steps, their microphones and cameras buzzing with hunger. Ashwood had never seen a case like this, a family torn apart by greed, violence, and betrayal. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Neighbors who once smiled politely at Richard now avoided Evelyn's eyes. Former friends of David sat stiff and silent, unwilling to be seen siding with him. When I walked to my seat near the front, I felt their gazes on me, but for the first time I didn't bow my head. I carried Walter's locket, his voice echoing in my memory. Quiet strength. Richard and David shuffled in, wearing orange jumpsuits, chains clinking as deputies guided them. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by something harsher, resentment carved into their faces. Monica followed, her expensive clothes exchanged for the same prison garb, her eyes darting nervously across the room. Evelyn sat separately, not in cuffs, but her face was ashen. Her eyes hollow. She was a witness, not a defendant, though her complicity would be exposed. The prosecutor opened with precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not simply a case of fraud. This is a case of family members who plotted to kill their own father and grandfather for money." He laid out the evidence one by one, the forged signatures, the inflated insurance policies, the bank withdrawals. Then he held up the recorder Ethan had provided. The jury leaned forward as the first tape played. David's voice filled the room, dripping contempt. "Problems get solved. People who dig too deep end up buried." Gasps rippled through the audience. I clenched my fists, remembering the moment his hand clamped around my arm. The prosecutor pressed play again. Richard's booming voice rang out. "If you can't behave, we'll make decisions for you. She's not the only Bennett who matters." The words echoed like a hammer blow. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to sit tall. They could no longer twist these words. They belonged to the jury now. Ethan testified next, steady and calm. He explained how Walter had hired him, how he gathered the documents and surveillance, how he intercepted conversations that revealed the truth. He described David purchasing accelerants, Monica meeting under false names, Richard pushing policies. He showed photographs and receipts, each piece tightening the noose. When my turn came, I walked to the stand, my legs trembling, but my spine straight. The prosecutor asked me about my childhood, about the control, the gaslighting, the violence. I answered quietly but firmly. I told the jury about nights when Richard's belt left welts, about David pinning me against the wall, about Evelyn's silence that cut as deeply as any blow. I told them about Walter, the man who gave me safety, who warned me, who pressed an envelope into my hand with shaking fingers. My voice broke when I described the funeral, the text message, the chilling realization that the casket might not hold the man we were meant to honor. But I lifted my head and let the jury see my eyes. They needed to know that I was not broken. I was standing. Richard's lawyer tried to rattle me, suggesting the texts were hallucinations, grief-born fantasies. He asked if I had proof Walter was alive when the messages came. I held up the envelope with Walter's handwriting, the notes he left me, the proof Ethan corroborated. Quiet strength became loud truth in that courtroom. Monica's defense was weak, claiming she was only following her husband's lead, that she had no idea of the plot. But the recordings betrayed her silky voice urging Walter into retirement communities, mocking me as weak, laughing about the staged accident. When her words played for the jury, her shoulders sagged and tears streaked her face. But no one reached to comfort her. David attempted defiance. On the stand, he spat that I was jealous, that I had fabricated everything, that Ethan had manipulated the evidence. But under cross-examination, the prosecutor cornered him with receipt, surveillance footage, and his own voice on tape. His arrogance crumbled, replaced by furious silence. Richard remained cold, smiling through most of the trial, but when pressed, he erupted. He shouted at the prosecutor, at the judge, at me, veins bulging, spittle flying. He thundered that I was no daughter of his, that Walter had poisoned me against the family, that he was only protecting what was his. The jury watched his rage with wide eyes, seeing the man behind the mask. Evelyn's testimony was the hardest. She wept on the stand, claiming she had been trapped, that she feared Richard, that she never wanted harm to come to Walter. The prosecutor asked her why she never stopped it, why she never called police, why she helped cover lies. Evelyn sobbed, unable to answer. The silence was louder than her tears. After 2 weeks of testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor's voice was sharp, steady. These men and this woman plotted not only to steal, but to kill. They used fear, manipulation, and lies to control their own blood. But truth has a way of surviving. Walter's courage, Clara's quiet strength, Ethan's evidence. They reveal what greed tried to bury. The defense muttered about desperation, about debts, about misunderstanding. But their words were thin compared to the mountain of proof. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The room was silent when they returned. I gripped Walter's locket, my heart pounding. The foreman stood, his voice steady. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find Richard Bennett, David Bennett, and Monica Bennett guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, we find Richard Bennett and David Bennett guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment and obstruction of justice, we find Monica Bennett guilty. The words washed over me like a tidal wave. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Richard's face twisted in fury. David's shoulders slumped. Monica wailed. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. The judge delivered the sentence. Richard Bennett, life imprisonment without parole. David Bennett, life imprisonment without parole. Monica Bennett, 20 years with possibility of parole after 10. Evelyn Bennett, though not charged, will live with the weight of silence. My breath caught tears filling my eyes, but this time they were not only for pain, they were for justice, for Walter, for me. It has been 2 years since the trial ended, and the echoes of that courtroom still follow me like shadows. Sometimes I wake in the night hearing Richard's roar, David's threats, Monica's sneer, Evelyn's sobs. But then I touch the locket at my throat and remember that they are gone, locked away, stripped of the power they once wielded over me. Justice may not erase scars, but it locks the cage on those who inflicted them. The farmhouse is mine now. For months after the verdict, I could barely step inside without trembling, but slowly I reclaimed it. I scrubbed the walls, tore up the stained carpets, painted the rooms in soft colors Walter loved. I turned the study where I once found forged papers into a quiet library filled with his old books. The barn, once a place David prowled with real estate agents, now holds rows of flowers and vegetables. And the porch, Walter's porch, is where I sit most evenings, sipping tea, listening to the crickets whispering, "Thank you" to the man who taught me quiet strength. Ethan visits often. He never presses, never asks for more than I can give. Sometimes we sit in silence, sometimes we talk about the foundation we created in Walter's name. With part of the settlement and donations that poured in after the trial, we built the Walter Bennett Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. We fund counseling, legal aid, and private investigators for people trapped in homes like mine, where silence and fear rule. Every week, letters arrive. Women in their 50s and 60s write that they endured decades of gaslighting and control, but found courage in my story. Men write that they finally stood against abusive fathers or brothers. Some even send photographs of gardens they planted in memory of Walter's small blossoms of resistance. One woman told me she recorded her husband's threats after watching my testimony, and now she lives free. Another said she finally believed her pain was real after hearing me describe gaslighting. Their words remind me that pain can be transformed into purpose. My family name once chained me. Now it lights a path for others. Still, healing is not simple. I keep a shoebox in the closet filled with letters David has written from prison. At first, I read them searching for remorse, but mostly they were curses, denials, blame. Then came one trembling note where he admitted guilt, said the money was never worth it, begged forgiveness. I have not answered. Forgiveness is complicated. I forgive the boy he once was the brother I wanted, but I cannot forgive the man who chose greed over love. Richard never writes. Word reaches me that he rules the prison yard with the same iron fist he used at home. Monica tried to appeal, claiming she was manipulated, but her voice on those recordings keeps her locked away. Evelyn lives alone in the city. She has called twice, her voice thin, asking to see me. I have not agreed. Silence is the boundary I choose. She may be my mother by blood, but motherhood is measured in protection, not denial. Walter remains my truest family. Every Sunday, I carry fresh flowers from the garden to his grave. His headstone reads Walter Bennett, beloved grandfather, quiet warrior. I sit beside the stone, tell him about the letters, about the foundation, about the people who whisper his name with gratitude, though they never met him. Sometimes the wind stirs the trees just as I finish speaking, and I choose to believe it is his approval. People often ask if I regret it, turning in my own father, my own brother, destroying what was left of my family. My answer never changes. They destroyed themselves. I only revealed the truth. Blood means nothing without loyalty, respect, and love. And truth, though painful, is the only inheritance worth keeping. I think often of that first message at the funeral, the words that nearly broke me. I am still alive. Trust no one. Leave now. Whether Walter himself sent them, or whether Ethan, guiding me from the shadows, used them to protect me, I will never know for certain. But what matters is that those words saved me. They pulled me from the trap. They lit the fire that carried me through courtrooms and confrontations, through nights of fear into mornings of peace. To anyone listening now, maybe sitting alone at night, with bruises on your soul, I want to say this: you are not weak. You are not crazy. If the people who claim to love you twist your reality, control your choices, strike you with fists or with silence, you have the right to fight back. Record their words, gather your proof, build your quiet strength, and when the moment comes, strike. Because family should never be an excuse for cruelty. Love should never be a mask for control. And justice, though it may take time, is possible. I am Clara Bennett. I was once the quiet daughter, the invisible sister, the silenced woman. But I stood up. I survived. And now I fight not just for myself, but for anyone still trapped in houses like the one I escaped. Walter once told me that a soldier wastes his life if he fires too soon. I waited, I watched, I endured. And when I struck, I ended the war my family thought they could win. The farmhouse is no longer haunted. It is a refuge. The garden blooms brighter every spring. And in every blossom, I see Walter's smile telling me I kept the promise to live, to fight, to turn pain into hope.